Going to go up now, but any questions?
I'll come and sit down.
Right. Second row in here, and then we can go up to the back.
I thought that was really interesting, and I just want to follow up on your point about Susan being labelled differently to Jennifer and Jill and the other women. And there's a whole theory in sociology called labelling theory, and it looked at how working class boys and middle class boys are treated when they do exactly the same thing. So if they break into cars and steal them, working class boys are locked up and criminal and they're labelled. And middle class boys are getting up to hijinks and, you know, they're spirited. And they end up with completely different criminal backgrounds. Mm-hmm. So I think you're right. Yeah. Susan's hard done by.
Yeah. Thanks.
The gender and sexuality paper. My neighbour and I were just briefly talking. We don't remember there ever being a lesbian in Ambridge.
No, you're absolutely right.
She didn't live there. She didn't live in Ambridge.
But that was a very, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It was a backstory. It's very small. She was only there for a short time, and then she was gone, wasn't she? I mean, it was. I think you know, what I'd be interested in is having longer term, you know, established characters.
Well, what I wanted to say was that, I mean, talking about reflecting contemporary values. I mean, there's actually a very long tradition of accepted lesbian couples, particularly in rural places. They're far less threatening to the community than gay male couples are. And they appear in fiction from really surprisingly early in a positive light. And it's just very surprising that the lesbians of Dorsetshire are keeping quiet. You really think they don't come into the farm shop.
They all live in Penny Hazard.
Can we go to the question at the back?
Thank you. My mother, who was at Glaswegian, used to say a trouble shared is a trouble doubled. Susan's gossip, it seems to me, is the collective imaginarium of Ambridge. Yeah. She says the things we think but don't say. She doesn't think twice about what she's doing. She's a person, a real person. In that sense, I think she's not one person. I think the role is that of the chorus. She's the Greek chorus.
Yeah. I agree. Of course I do. But I also think, do you know, I think Susan is you. Because, and I'll explain that, what I mean by that. I think that she says all the things that you lot are thinking about the storylines and the characters. I think she's verbalising them. Perhaps that's why you don't like her very much.
And that's what the chorus does.
Yeah. Exactly.
Claire? And sorry, were you there? No, you're there, Abby. Sorry, we'll come back. Claire.
Yeah.
You're this lady here.
Sorry. Just as I was listening to Claire Mortimer, it occurred to me like a lightning bolt that where does gossip end and networking begin?
Oh, good point. Grey area. It's all about perception, isn't it? You know?
So we'll go to this question and then at the back.
Yeah, I see all the machinations this week about Brian sort of, you know, gaining support behind the scenes. That's not seen as gossip, but it's basically the same thing. Anyway, my question is, as a child psychologist specialist, how disturbed is Henry going to be?
Well, it depends on his social support network.
Oh my God!
I think in those kinds of situations, if you've got a good support network around you, then it can help a child overcome all sorts of difficulties. But you're right. In that environment.
And as we know from last year as well, his school is no good with safeguarding either, so it's that side of the family.
I know. But I'm just hoping he might find a significant person in the village. Susan, I think. who can help him through, because he will. He's experienced a lot of trauma. He's seen a lot of things that he shouldn't, and heard a lot of things he shouldn't have heard. So it's bound to have some kind of impact, but hopefully not too dramatic. Well, do I hope?
Thank you. Just wanted to know if you could share your chili recipe. Just confirm. I'm asking for a friend.
I'll see you outside after.
So something that I wanted to ask about, and something that we've talked about a lot, and there's been a lot of chat online about. It was really helpful for you to put into context about what having women writers show up. And of course, Vanessa Whitburn, because you would have worked with her for years and years. And I was reading some of the old Archer's books. There were books before our book, but there was quite a lot of chat about how she was trying to kind of enforce feminist storylines. And there was some pushback from the kind of more right-wing media around, this is all kind of, women's lib kind of stuff. And I was kind of wondering about that, because there certainly is a lot of women in Ambridge, but there aren't a lot of feminists in Ambridge. No. And, my own personal hobby horse, bloody Pat, right? Being a feminist isn't about, positioning yourself. It's about, at the point at which you might be required to notice something, then you might actually have had some form of empathy with that whole business. So, we probably have Kirsty as a feminist.
Yeah, she's the most likely.
Yeah.
In terms of, and I guess, one can discuss one's definition, all day. And the thing that I think is interesting in The Village is that the mothers and others thing I find quite problematic, because there's quite a lot of lady academics who don't have children. And Brenda, great hopes for Brenda, degree educated, career focused, buggered off. And Alice seems to be now just following her granddad down the, what's wrong with educated, emancipated, feminist characters in a drama which is so clearly full of women, but not necessarily feminist women? That's not to Charlotte, it's kind of...
No, it's fascinating. Fascinating point.
You've got, I'm interested to see Lily coming up through, because she's blatantly going to take over the business. It's not going to go to Freddie. Well, I will anyway. And then Phoebe as well, and that's a really big storyline. And what's Phoebe going to become? Debbie, though, also. Special woman disappears.
She buggered off.
Exactly.
She's gone.
So
She's too good.
I think in the storyline with Emma as well, and I was so disappointed in Linda when she wasn't being an ally to Emma. She was going along by her class allegiance rather than her gender allegiance. And actually, I think Susan more consistently would be an advocate for women over a class.
I think she would. I think she'd be useful to use her in that fashion.
Whether
or not that will happen, I don't know.
We have a question here.
Well, it's referring to your feminist point. I wonder if you're confusing feminism with sort of taking your own lead. Like, you can be... I was just saying to my mum, Jill, for me, I view her as quite feminist. She's strong-willed, she takes the lead on... I'm not a long-time listener of the article. Going on a couple of years, so maybe in the past she's let down. But you can want to bake flapjacks and take care of your family while still being a really strong feminist. So don't confuse the two, of the Alice can't follow in her granddad's footsteps and take a strong lead at the farm.
I meant as a pisshead.
Oh, okay, sorry.
It's a really good point, and yes, I think you're right. I just think that what you're saying is don't conflate women and independence and all the rest of it. And I'm saying don't just conflate women with motherhood and village life. So I guess
it's got to be a full...
We go here, and then up, and then we'll go here.
Hi, to go back to the gender and sexuality, the Ambridge Pride is unlikely to happen. Who's going to organise the bus trip to Felsham Pride?
Could Jack become Jacqueline?
Oh, wow.
Oh, well, yeah, who knows?
I'm interested in what they're starting to do with Emma in terms of turning into her mother, and the patterns of Neil and Susan's relationship and Ed and Emma's relationship, and that general thing of how are the gossips going to work in the next generation of Ambridge women.
What do you think Emma's doing a good job of becoming?
I've really noticed it in the last couple of months how they seem to be repositioning Emma as, you know, doing the things that her mother has done. It's sort of really noticeable to me.
But you know, I can understand that. Living in close proximity and she sees her quite frequently. They see each other a lot, far more than I see my mother. And I think the influence is great. I mean, how could you not be influenced by spending lots of time around Susan? You're bound to come out damaged in some way. What was that exposure theory we were talking about?
You mentioned there about Brenda Tugger. And who turned out to be beautiful and so clever and left.
Yeah.
Said, they all buggered off. Perhaps if Alice had buggered off, she wouldn't be drinking herself into the ground. So
you're saying that Ambridge isn't a good environment for women?
Yeah.
It's a really good point.
So we just needed a mass exodus of all the female characters.
Yes, hopefully including Phoebe.
Okay, question there and there. Yeah.
It's Susan.
I think so much. I feel like Daniel in the Lioness's Den a bit. I think the Kiwi talking about the cricket. I mean, we downplayed Tracy's role in the team, general raising morale with her good-humoured banter, and not to mention her cricketing abilities. But in Ambridge, so much is implied. If you go back to the 50s, I think Christine went off. There's a shadowy figure called Lady Hilbarrow. Who wanted to take her to Ethiopia to look at wall paintings. What? How come we've all forgotten Pat's special friend Rose? I mean, Pat went through quite a phase in the early 80s. The lady from Borchester Tech, didn't they go off to Greenham Common? What about Rosamund Tarrant, Nelson's daughter, who turned out to be a policewoman? And I think she was engaged in a lesbian relationship. So there's
multiple lesbians.
It's certainly there.
So, and this all probably happened in the 70s, didn't it? I think, probably. When I was...
Well, we're going back to the 50s.
You're going back to the 50s? Wow, gosh.
Well, that's clearly a massive research grant required.
Next year.
I shouldn't have put my hand up just as I put a sweet in my mouth. I wanted to ask what you thought about Susan's character in the context of social mobility, because I think we're all quite happy to snigger at her as a social climber, and everyone's keenness to kind of squash her aspirations, but actually in terms of that bigger agenda around social mobility, I'm not sure what it says about us.
No, that's a good point. I mean, that's one of the things that she's always described as a social climber. She always wants to do better, she's always pushing. And we all joke about it, but it's actually an important issue. And actually, if we all look at our lives, we're all trying to do better, aren't we? We're all trying to rise, not necessarily move from working class to middle class, but we're trying to do better for ourselves and those around us. And it's interesting that Susan is castigated for that somewhat. So again, I'm not quite sure whether it's about her being working class and middle aged that it's an issue, because it's become an issue the older she's got. I think when she was younger, that wasn't seen as part of her personality, so it's grown with her. But yeah, it is a very good point.
There's a certain hypocrisy, isn't there? There's sort of you love generally loving the underdog, but as soon as the underdog then starts to succeed, you shun them completely.
It's a typical British thing. I mean, we do that. We set people up to knock them down, don't we?
Why don't you see your dad?
Bert for years. Yeah. He's living in a flat somewhere, I think. I don't know.
Could we go back to everyone that gave a paper for their reflections on everybody else's papers? Would that be all right? So we didn't really get any questions. I'm looking at. Shall I come back to you?
Claire,
do you want to
go first?
I just wanted to add Sister, what you were saying about Susan and aspiring to become middle class. I think there's been a lot of pathos in terms of her attempts in the last couple of weeks to change her job. And even though we are meant to laugh at her thinking that she has all these abilities which aren't recognised, I genuinely felt moved by the episode when she sort of realised, when Neil realises why she's trying to do it, to protect him, but also felt that actually she has got a lot of ability, she has got a lot of skills. I know that maybe then, she's not going to be a top lawyer, but there is no place for her. Maybe she needs to leave Ambridge too and go where Brenda went.
Edit that out, John. We want her in an old person's home. Lou, do you want to come back on anything?
I just had a text from my daughter saying, I heard you used my name.
Oh! Did she?
Say about everybody.
When did you say your daughter's name?
I told everyone, but she said my fart joke would have.
Oh, yes, she did. All right, everybody, erase your memory of that.
I think
Sorry.
I think Susan's fabulous, and without Susan, we wouldn't have the Archers. But I think Susan's going to have big things happen to her because Emma is going to become Prime Minister. all your influential views.
Oh my goodness, yes, I'll be in the Shard before you know it, won't I? Dying
10 Downing Street.
Thank you. No, it's I think that as well. I think she's. I mean, I don't know because I don't know the storylines, but there's been a lot of the episodes I've been doing recently here talking about kind of trying to improve yourself and kind of manipulating things to work out. So I'm just hoping that the job as Queen of Kafir is profitable, and don't let me forget to get mine.
I did ask whether the Chuckling Goat had received your Susan's CV.
I've got one with me.
Good. I think you're absolutely right, Lou, and I think sometimes one's greatest achievement is not something you do, but it's someone that you bring into the world. So it might be that Emma. I mean, please God, can we have her making a success of this local politics business? I think that would be fantastic.
I think she needs to do something.
And we talked last year at length about how there's no member of parliament, there's no, and it gets back to the thing about there's no authority above the parish council, and obviously there's a lot to do with that because you don't want to situate it, so it becomes problematic. But why can't she go? Why can't she kind of,
But actually, we've talked about the educated, the formally educated women of Ambridge. I never thought I'd be shouting at the radio, but she's right, when I was hearing Susan's marketing for the career and talking about labelling theory. Susan has her own labelling theory, which is really, really good, and she's right. That knowledge is incredible. Well, she didn't. Even cleverer.
Even cleverer. She worked on it a lot herself.
It's just a comment really, which is to say that I think that Susan and Neil have got the most successful romantic relationship, loving relationship in the whole village. And in terms of Susan's sort of power and influence, she certainly has a lot of sexual influence over Neil.
It's because she knows how to make a good chili.
So, and I think that's a really interesting side to Susan's character that we see, and a more sort of genuine and sort of appealing side, I suppose.
And that's replicated in with the Linda and Robert marriage. So beyond the Aldridges and the Archers, the relationships are more nurturing and friendlier.
And I think we were talking earlier about housing, weren't we? And about situating, looking inside into the houses and into the relationships, and how you don't see those things about some of the characters, but actually you do.
I was thinking as well. Sorry, go on.
Unlike, I completely agreed with a lot of the points that were made about the sort of, tradition of sort of battle axes that Susan might come from. But there's an important difference, which is that Susan is beautiful. And Neil regularly tells her that, you know, when she appears in nice dresses.
Yes, he does. He does.
Anybody else that's spoken in the other section want to reflect on the other papers? Elizabeth, you've got feels or?
Maybe try to shout.
No, we won't hear it. The rest of the world can't hear you.
I don't believe it will be successful.
So thanks very much. I'm not sure that you particularly, you basically just said
Right,
that it's the issues that I identified are issues. So I was trying to cram a lot into 5 minutes. But it really interested me when you were talking that you identified Rob as having narcissistic personality disorder. I know he's basically universally identified as having that by the whole fan community, but in the village it seemed like, I mean, not only did the entire village accept Helen's version of events unquestioningly and turn on Rob as one body, which does not gel with reality, for me anyway, but also it doesn't seem that was really discussed on the programme. It was quite thoroughly discussed here, but and that really, I mean, there's a whole lot of, you know, how men and women treated differently in terms of storytelling about mental health and in Ambridge, but which I don't expect you to have time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very true. I do think that we all know a lot of people with narcissistic personality disorder who operate quite functionally and do what they're supposed to do, and no one would probably question some of their behaviours. And I think that's how I think he was part of the traits of a narcissistic person is even manipulation, and I think he was very clever at manipulating the people in the village, manipulating Helen, and manipulating the listeners to kind of, I don't know, because I think for a long time, because the storyline was a slow burner, which I think worked very, very well for that storyline. There were moments when you thought, oh, he's really weird, and then you thought, oh no, he's not, and then, oh God, he is weird, and then no, he's not again. And I think that's a classic trait of someone who would be diagnosed with that. But yeah.
But it's interesting that on the programme they actually didn't.
No.
He was just demonised and sent away.
Well, there was a psychologist, wasn't there? And that was all just him being very misogynistic around, or what do they know? I don't think they ever came to
I don't know, I think maybe it's my inventive memory. Weren't there some very, very short comments, and it was kind of, I think the village felt some shame, actually.
That they
and so it couldn't, it couldn't
was,
actually articulate that, yeah.
It's interesting, the first time we had academic lectures, which was sort of 3 years ago today, I remember really clearly somebody standing up for Rob, and do you remember our old guard? It started over a conversation over lunch, and someone was saying, no, he's okay. And we, basically at that point, it was starting to just go really wrong, you know, and really the denunciation was so, but do you remember, Sarah, it sort of went a little bit, no, it's through. But it was a kind of, I think it was a residual ripple of his kind of edifice of respectability. Yeah. And you're right, for a long time, and my dad was saying, well, he does all the right things, you know, he's good at all the right things, that it's really hard to call those people out, which I guess is your point, that some people are much easier to call out on their bullshit than somebody who's been to the right school and all that stuff.
And also, we have to think about, you know, he's social class, you know, he's a middle class man. And
well, he's kind of upper middle class.
Or upper middle class, and I think that, again, that's, he's social class, the lack of understanding generally and awareness of mental health problems and what the symptoms are, and also the reluctance to actually label people, despite, even if he's done something terrible. I think all that probably played into how that was dealt with.
So Catherine, as another of our speakers, to reflect a little bit on women in Ambridge.
Well, there's probably a reason why Susan couldn't be interested in cricket. Since the 1950s, the cricket team in Ambridge comes and goes from the storyline. If Susan had been interested in cricket, we would never hear the end of it. It would be there all the time. But what I was just thinking about while we were listening to the gossip papers, which I found incredibly interesting, is there's quite a strong link between the changing rooms in cricket and any other sport and gossip.
Yes.
Huge. And there are a lot of academic papers about what gets discussed in the changing rooms. And the interesting thing about Tracy Horriban is she was actually displaying men's behaviour in the changing room, not women's. She was asking Anisha what Rex was like in the sack and all this kind of stuff. And that's not what women are supposed to talk about. Men talk about that, not women. But in fact, they do.
We talk about
No, you're right, and I think what was interesting about that, Catherine, was that was around the time when there was all the Trump locker room talk. So it was very much around, like, what is the norm in these environments? And you're right. I mean, I think so. Tell me, can I ask about the rest of the horribins? Because I do the networks and I draw them all together. And I was just saying to Olivia earlier on, I get confused. So tell us about your family.
Now you're going to have to help me out with this one. There's Tracy.
Yes.
Keith. Gary. Stuart.
Tracy, Gary, Stuart,
so there's
Clyde, you, 5 of you.
And Clyde should be out of prison now, shouldn't he? I think.
Oh yeah,
and then there's one who still lives with Bert, who has, or is it Gary? And he has Star Trek wallpaper on his. So I don't know what that says about him. Perhaps it's a paper in that, I don't know. And then I don't really know about the others, to be honest.
It is quite weird that some of the other family networks are so foregrounded.
They are.
It's almost like in order for you to be the chorus, you need to be a bit less.
I need to have a family that's so shameful that I.
But you've transcended them.
Yeah.
Madeline.
First of all, Charlotte, thank you very much for your comments about cycling.
It was interesting, really interesting.
Thank you, and I wanted to apologise for not mentioning Neil and Susan, an obvious example that I missed.
Well, it just struck me as I thought, that's what Susan did to me. That's absolutely what she did.
I'd be interested in your views about Mike, Vicky and Bethany leaving. I think that was a big shame because there was a real element of the story that could continue with a younger generation and diversity in the village.
I think actually that's a really good point. I mean, we were all very disappointed as actors. We were very disappointed because when that storyline started to emerge, we thought, fantastic. For years and years and years, we've been having this discussion about kind of, we need to include people with disabilities or learning disabilities, whatever. And it's never happened. In fact, years and years ago, when Susan first, when Emma was very, very young, there was talk of Emma having a terrible accident and being in a wheelchair. And I thought, oh, that would be fab. That would be great.
In this context, one of our stalwart academic archers, which is Catherine Brunswick Cole, does work on scholar activism. And she did a paper last year on exactly this with. Was it with Lou? It was with you.
Okay.
And her point is that, well, you can surmise your argument if you like from the floor, but it's the sort of ordinariness of, and it's kind of back to the mental health point. People should have kind of chronic things that are going on that kind of flare up from time to time, rather than sort of 0 to 60 and then it all goes away. It seems like that's
because it's a drama. It needs to be dramatic. I suppose. But anyway, going back to that story, I thought that would be a good storyline and it would be a useful thing to do. And then it was ditched. It was not used. So when that storyline with Bethany and all emerged. Again, we thought, okay, this is great now. It's a few years on, but it'll work. And then I'll be honest, I don't know what happened. Suddenly, they were leaving the village, and I'm not sure whether. I think it might be related to what you were saying. I think once things become normalised, it's all right in the instant when you have this dramatic event. I mean. That's great, that's dramatic, people will listen, people will find it interesting. But once it becomes normalised, once we become exposed to it and familiar with it, it probably loses its attraction. And I don't know, I mean, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but perhaps that's the issue,
I could have seen Emma as a council member taking that whole thing about education, special education, and how there was a need for it, and it's never,
No. But also that brings Brenda back as well, because because also Roy's stuck out like a bit of a sore thumb at the moment, isn't he? He's got no networks apart from he occasionally goes to Birmingham. And I think that I can't see where Bill's sitting now. Where's Bill?
Let's see. Oh, Bill.
Bill? Oh, there you are. And I think we talked about this, I think, online. It was about one of the attractions for Peter, our third academic archer, was he just couldn't believe that a gay couple would just be a normal couple getting on with normal stuff. Yeah. And he thought that was quite inspiring at the time as a young gay man. So I'm interested if the Adam and Ian relationship might have served that purpose. But now, with the sort of...
Everybody's used to them.
Yeah, and then when they have problems, they're just their relationship problems rather than specifically kind of gay problems.
Yeah.
Which I think is... But did you want to say anything about all of this terrain since you were a speaker?
Yeah, I guess I would echo that. That's kind of one of the things that I was thinking about when I was putting it together. And yeah, it's definitely just about relationship issues rather than gay issues. But I think that's where it becomes interesting when it becomes normal. But then there's other things that you can do, and I think that normal, and then you can still be really dramatic and you can still be gay, and it just normalizes it, and that's a really positive thing, I think. Slightly aside, but going back to some of the feminism stuff I was thinking about, one of the other things that I didn't have time to squeeze in at all, but I was really interested in looking at it intersectionally, not from disability, which is really interesting, but in terms of ethnicity, and I just have found it really interesting looking at Nola Tando and how she's being portrayed and how other characters are interpreting her attitude, and I find it really odd almost that there's like a mixed race woman and she's being accused of having attitude and things, and it's interesting.
Oh, you look so urban. I mean, that's Sociology 101. It's like the first day. The difference between a group of drunk lads in the middle of the night in Oxford in tailcoats and hoodied guys. You know, it's just all in the, as you said, it's all in the kind of eye of the beholder in a sense, isn't it? So intersectionality around gender and sex and sexuality, but intersectionality back to disability.
Yes, I just wanted to say that part of what some of us are arguing is for, as I think has just been said in fact, the sort of normalisation in a way of disability. So with regard to somebody like Bethany, many of us were thinking that would be a golden opportunity to look at the sort of educational issues that can arise, which is a huge, huge problem, for example. But equally at the same time, if it does just end up embedded within the fabric of village life, then that's actually a good thing. It doesn't always have to be interesting.
Which is showing that things really can get boring in any relationship.
But it's interesting you talk about, you know, I mean, I absolutely agree that we, you know, in order to integrate disability, mental health, whatever, into society, we have to normalise it. I mean, that's the most, and we have to talk about it. And that's the role I see of programmes like The Archers, is to raise awareness and knowledge of things that perhaps people find difficult or haven't experienced themselves. But as actors, it's funny because we're talking about normalising things and perhaps storylines not being dramatic. When you come into the programme and you're not married, you have lots of storylines, it seems to me, and then as soon as you get married, it's like the kiss of death, and things kind of just stop. and you know, you ask any of the actors, and they'll say the same. You know, you'll get young people come in, and they say, "Oh yes, well we might have this storyline where we get married to this person." I say, "No, don't stay single." And
well, that might be why then, because our generation of archers are hopeless. I mean, the only, again, the network thing, the only child to married parents of the Generation X, us, is Mungo.
Right, yes.
Everybody else is the wrong side of the blanket, or someone else is this, that and the other. There is nobody else. And I realise, you know, things are more liberal these days, but I know some married people that have got children, for God's sake. It's weird, right? And I wonder if that's it, because you're right, there's far more drama in will they, won't they, and
of course it is.
And poor old Kirsten, she just, you know, somebody said, didn't they, a new male character must be in want of a short relationship. You're right, I guess that.
Oh, I hope he's a keeper. I like him. Who's this?
Right, Philip, yes or no?
Yes.
Too many of you. Hands up if you think he sounds like a good guy.
No.
Hands up if you think he sounds like a bit of a snurge. Right.
There's another question. Do we think they'll marry?
The question, what Kirsty?
No, but the third question is, are they going to get together permanently? And I personally think no.
No. Okay. Do you think that Kirsty and Philip will get together permanently? Yes. Even though his dad dumped all the stuff on Brian's
Yes, I
lap.
think so.
You don't have to. But
I don't think it can fail for Kirsty again.
you think she's due?
Yeah, I've got a feeling that they're kind of marrying her off with this one. I think. Yeah. Question here.
I wanted to ask a question about two characters. St. Shula, the hostess. They seem to have become, they've lost their strength and their, I mean, for example, Jennifer would have been a member of the Morris dancing. She used to maintain the village website, and she was very much into doing the history of Ambridge.
She wrote her books, yeah?
Yes,
she
she
did.
was like Linda Snell.
She did.
Yeah, and what about Shula? She's so unhappy and so
Shula's depressed.
Shula's just, Shula's depressed, isn't she? I mean, I think she's withdrawn, hasn't she, really, from the social life in the village, I think, and that's a classic early symptom of depression. So perhaps I think if we unpicked all the characters in Ambridge, we could find some kind of mental health problem.
That's your headline, world media.
Ambridge has gone to the
Abby.
I sort of love and hate Susan in equal measure, because it's one of these things I don't know. If you are very, very working class, which I am, but people seem to fail to believe for whatever reason, she says things and I hear myself say, and I just think, oh no, I would say that. And my husband calls me a harridan, incidentally, so it's not necessarily a middle-aged thing, because he calls me that. But just going back to the gossip thing, I just wanted to comment that what I think is really interesting about the idea of gossip is that it's a gendered thing, because it's a way of dismissing conversation between women and rendering it less significant than conversation which takes place that involves men. And I think it's really interesting that Susan will get information out of and talk to everyone, and in that way it's actually quite subversive, because the gossip isn't just female-centred. She's interested in everybody.
She is, but I also think that gossip for her serves the purpose of social interaction. I don't think she has very many friends. Well, I know she doesn't. She has Neil, and that's great, and that's lovely. But I think outside of that relationship, the only real person that she kind of socialises with is Cara. And Cara's got her own stuff going on, and whatever. So I think Susan's actually quite lonely, to be honest. And I think that working in a village shop, seeing lots of people coming in, getting gossip out of people is okay. It's on the one hand, it is interesting. She's interested in knowing about other people's lives, but I also think it kind of, in a gossip situation, you've got the gossiper and you've got the listener, and then you've got the person you're talking about. And actually, by engaging the listener about that other person, she forms a little kind of network and social group of her own, whether it's against that person or just knowledge about that person. But it forms bonds, and I think she doesn't know any other way to do that.
But there's two things there. Sorry.
It's her power. She's very disempowered. It's
Exactly.
With the nuggets of information she's got that others are desperate to hear, she has that powerful moment.
The thing is about Susan, she doesn't punch down differently than she punches up, and that is a very admirable quality. Some people, if someone's weaker, then they behave differently, and she doesn't do that at all, and that's why she's so ambivalent, I think. The other thing I wanted to say before we go back to the floor was we did have a research associate that we knew over Twitter who did the Bechdel test for the Archers for 187 episodes. So the Bechdel test, for all of you who aren't media scholars, two women have to have a conversation of some duration and not be talking about a man. They can be talking about the cows, they can be talking about food, which is obviously gendered too, but it's not how's your husband, how's your son. And she did it for 187 episodes. She was unemployed at the time. She stopped doing it because she got a good job. And the Arch, what do you think? Do you think it passed or failed more? Stop. So, did the Archers pass the Bechdel test more often than not? No, it didn't. Over a sample of 187 episodes, only about 60 involved women, and then you can go into it because and it's contested and all the rest of it. But normally, the drama circles around husbands, sons, and all the rest of it. And there isn't a lot, back to this question, lots of women, how many feminists? It's not about, so you're doing your brilliant evening class, whereby you know, it's much more, you know, how's your dad, how's your brother? Definitely. Sorry.
So we've got
right.
question up here.
And last round. Hands up here and
here.
Maybe.
I was just wanting to reflect on race.
Race, yeah.
Race. And again, we sort of do down the programme and sort of say, oh, they're so slow to respond to things. But of course, I mean, you know, violence, the shooting in the 50s, the illegitimate child in the 60s.
Ned Larkin.
Ned Larkin. And of course, in the 70s, there was a character, I think she was Jackie Smith, I think, who was a barmaid at the Bull, who was brought in from Brummie, and she had leggings and she ran around in a pink tracksuit. And she was Susan, don't listen, she was a squeeze for Neil before you. But the elephant in the room was, of course, she was black. But in Ambridge, they were too polite to actually say that. No one knew she was black. She wasn't. So, of course, it took
she sounded black.
Well, she didn't even sound black. She sounded Brummie. Yeah. And then, but then, of course, it took Brian to mention the elephant in the room 20 years later when he said, Lucas is black.
Yeah. But that's the same as the Nolitando point. And this is something interesting about the fandom, because there's a lot of chat online. People saying, oh, Nolly, what's her name? I don't know how to say it. And people saying, you're being racist by not taking her name seriously. It's an African name. You can say Rory and Freddie and all the rest of it. So, you know, work on yourself to kind of, you know, work on that. Right. This is
Christian here,
5 minutes.
2 here, 3 here.
Everybody in. Yeah, it's you. It's you.
Can I just come back a little bit to poor Alice? Because I think Alice is exhibiting a classic feminist problem at the moment, which is she's being urged to have children. She's a career girl. She doesn't want to have children. I think we were talking about it, weren't we, at lunchtime?
She's got a horrible boss, apparently, hasn't she?
Sorry?
Her boss is not very pleasant, is it?
So she's having, I mean, she's in there fighting for the career woman, really. And I'm thinking also it's a shame Susan doesn't have more in common with Alice, because she's got Emma, but Alice would be a wonderful daughter-in-law for her to cleave to. But I think Alice is having a tough time at the moment.
No, she is.
I just feel I need to put us, you know.
Yeah.
Push
I mean, I
her
think
on
it's a classic thing. I don't know whether you heard the episode recently where Susan was trying to get Christopher to go to come and see Neil because he wasn't very well. And Alice got her other thing, and she was saying, no, we can't do that. We're going to my parents, all this and the other. I don't think Susan liked that, because I think Susan likes to be the family, you know, and kind of, and I think she'd like Christopher and Alice to be at her beck and call. But I think Alice is stronger than that. I don't think she's the kind of person
we were saying that she might have to go through the IVF because she's not having children.
Do you think?
Well, I think it's a distinct possibility.
I think she's got alcoholism writ large. Coming like a train.
Oh, it's all doom and gloom.
Just pondering your comment that when issues get normalised, they kind of drift away. Could we normalise the herringbone cowshed?
I'm just wondering if Susan is a tiny bit unlikable, because she seems to me rarely to display empathy for other people, so all gossip for her is currency. She doesn't ever put some bit aside and say, actually, that's not something I'm going to share with anyone else.
So she's unempathic, you think?
I mean, she's very, very devoted to her own family and to improving their prospects, but I can't think of really any occasions where she's rejoiced in the successes of others.
And you can again contrast that with Linda Snell, who occasionally, and so there are Linda Snell haters, but occasionally she does make common cause with somebody, and she is quite discreet and supportive. And I had never noticed that until it was pointed out to me, and then we hear it all the time, that actually she
does do that, yeah.
Whereas Susan certainly doesn't.
Perhaps, I mean, I can see what you mean about her being an empathic. She doesn't very often consider other people's feelings. She's not terribly. She doesn't listen to people very well, does she? I believe that she might be on the autistic spectrum.
That's a qualified point of view.
But seriously, why I'm saying that is that the autistic spectrum is a continuum, and we all know that people who are diagnosed with autism are right at that end very often. But the people can be at any point along it, and I definitely know some colleagues who display traits of autism. Now, I'm not saying Susan's diagnosed with autism, but I think she might have some of those traits in that she finds she doesn't really connect, and it goes back to my point about her not having very many kind of friends or close allies, that she's kind of separate.
And times as well when it takes Neil to point something out to her that she then realises.
So I'm thinking off the top of my head here, I'm just throwing things, but that's an interesting point about her empathy or lack of it.
And if we, for the purposes of this question, if we just go with it, so as an actress, is that in your head that she might have those kind of tendencies, or is it more that you're following the storylines and you're trying to do justice to what you see her as like?
I try my hardest to flesh her out in my head as much as possible. So when I get my scripts and I see what storyline's coming up, I'll try to think, okay, what's the backstory here? What possible conversations might she have had with various people about the issues that are going to come up? How would she feel about it? What would her be responses to it? And try to flesh her out as much as possible, because, as I say, we don't get the scripts till probably 2 or 3 weeks before we record them, and unless it's a massive storyline, then we are not privy to them until a few weeks before. So it's important, I think, for all the characters to spend some time just fleshing them out. I think, and that's our job as actors, obviously. But I think that being in psychology as well, I think that's informed my thinking around who she is and why she does the things she does.
Right, we've lost the anarchists. That's one thing.
We're at time.
Yes. Oh, we could go on.
I know. That was so lovely.